Going down Broadway is a one-way street, whichever way I go.
If I were working with a small amount of money, the universe would be huge compared to the universe of possible ideas I work with now. You mentioned that 56 to 69 was the best period. Actually, my best period was before that. It was from right after I met Ben Graham in early 1951. But from the end of 1950 through the next 10 years, actually returns averaged about 50% a year. And I think they were 37 points better than the Dow per year, something like that. But I was working with a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of money. And so I would pour through volumes of businesses, and I would find one or two that I could put $10,000 into or $15,000 into that were just ridiculous. They were ridiculously cheap. And obviously, as the money increased, the universe of possible ideas started shrinking dramatically. The times were also better for doing it in that time. But I think if you're working with a small amount of money, with exactly the same background that Charlie and I have, and same ideas, same whatever ability we have, I think you can make very significant sums. When I started, I went through the pages of the manuals page by page. I mean, I probably went through 20,000 pages in the Moody's Industrial, Transportation, Banks, and Finance manuals. And I did it twice. So I would say if you're working with a small sum of money and you're really interested in the business and willing to do the work, you will find something. If you were, there's no question about it in my mind. You will find some things that promise very large returns compared to what we will be able to deliver with large sums of money. Charlie?
Well, yeah, I think that's right. A brilliant man who can't get any money from other people and is working with a very small sum probably should work in very obscure stocks, searching out unusual, mispriced opportunities. But, that's such a small world. It may be a way for one person to come up, but it's a long slog.
Well, if I were working with small sums of money, and I would be happy doing that, it would just open up thousands of possibilities to me, and you might very well, certainly we've found very mispriced bonds where we could come nowhere near buying a position of enough size in Berkshire to make a difference, but where it would have made a difference if you were working with $1 million. But it would be bonds, it would be stocks of both in the United States and elsewhere. We found them in Korea a few years ago that were ridiculously cheap. You basically had to make very significant returns, but you couldn't put big money out in it. So it could be in stocks, it could be in bonds. It wouldn't be in currencies with small amounts. But, I had a friend who used to buy tax liens, Tom Knapp. He's got some relatives here. And an enterprising person can find a lot of different ways of making money. You'll find them, most of them will be in small stocks. If you're working with small money, they'll be in small stocks or in some specialized bond situations. Wouldn't you say that, Charlie?
Sure.
Influenced by Phil Fisher when I first read his two books back around 1960 or thereabouts, and I think that they're terrific books. I think Phil is a terrific guy. So I think I probably gave that percentage to, I think I first used it in Forbes one time when Jim Michaels wrote me, and I think it was one of those things I just named a number. But I think I'd rather think of myself as being a sort of 100% Ben Graham and 100% Phil Fisher in the points where they don't, and they really don't contradict each other. It's just that they had vastly different emphasis. Ben would not have disagreed with the proposition that if you can find a business with a high rate of return on capital that can keep using more capital on that, that's the best business in the world. And of course, he made most of his money out of GEICO, which was precisely that sort of business. So he recognized it. It's just that he felt that the other system of buying things that were statistically very cheap and buying a large number of them was an easier policy to apply, and one that was a little more teachable. He would have felt that Phil Fisher's approach was less teachable than his, but his had a more limited value because it was not workable with really large sums of money. At Graham Newman Corp was a closed-end fund. It was technically an open-end fund, but it had $6 million of net worth, and Newman and Graham, the partnership that was affiliated with it, had $6 million. So you had a total pool of $12 million. Well, you could go around buying little machine tool stocks in machine tool companies, whatever it might be, all statistically cheap, and that was a very good group operation. And if you own a lousy business, you have to sell it at some point. I mean, if you own a group of lousy businesses, you better hope some of them get taken over or something happens. You need turnover. If you own a wonderful business, you don't want turnover, basically. Charlie?
What was interesting to me about the Phil Fisher businesses is that a very great many of them didn't last as wonderful businesses. One of his businesses was Title Insurance and Trust Company, which dominated the state of California. It had the biggest title plant, which was maintained by hand, and it had great fiscal solvency and integrity and so forth. It just dominated a lucrative field. And along came the computer. And now you could create for a few $1 million a title plant and keep it up without an army of clerks. And pretty soon we had 20 different title companies, and they would go to great big customers like big lenders and big real estate brokers and pay them outlandish commissions by the standards of yore, and bid away huge blocks of business. And in due course, in the state of California, the aggregate earnings of all the title insurance companies combined went below zero, starting with a virtual monopoly.
So what looked like a monopoly.
Very few companies are so safe that you can just look ahead 20 years. And technology is sometimes your friend and it's sometimes your bitter enemy. If Title Insurance and Trust Company had been smart, they would have looked on that computer, which they saw as a cost reducer, as one of the worst curses that ever came to man.
It probably takes more business experience and insights to some degree to apply Phil Fisher's approach than it does Graham's approach. The only problem is you may be shut out of doing anything for a long time with Ben's approach, and you may have a lot of difficulty in doing it with big money. But if you strictly applied, for example, his working capital test to security, it will work. It just may not work on a very big scale, and there may be periods when you're not doing much. Ben really was more of a teacher than he had no urge to make a lot of money. It did not interest him. So he really wanted something that he thought was teachable and as a cornerstone of his philosophy or approach. And he felt you could read his books sitting out here in Omaha and apply buying things that were statistically cheap, and you didn't have to have any special insights about business or consumer behavior or anything of the sort. And I don't think there's any question about that being true, but I also don't think you can manage lots of money in accord with it. You can find things out there.